there everybody, it's markcrilley. I'm back with another video. Before we get started, I just want to send out a quick little message to two of my viewers, Ashley Little and Sabina Adelpohler. My publisher needs to hear from you. Please send an email to publicity@10speed.com. Just say, hey, it's Ashley, or hey, it's Sabina. markcrilley told me to send you an email, and they will explain what it's all about. You're not in trouble, I promise you. It's good. You'll be glad that you sent this email. Anyway, let's get on with the video. Today I am going to be doing a comparison of 4 different ways of adding highlights to shoujo eyes. But in order to do that, I need to have some shoujo eyes to add the highlights to. So that's what I'm going to do now, all in time-lapse. I'm going to just go straight in with the ink, ink this all up, and then I'll be back to explain what the next step is in the process. Alright, well, we've got the basic drawing done, and I'm sure some of you are saying, well, wait a minute, you didn't show us how to draw these eyes. Well, happily, I've done lots of videos on how to draw eyes, most of them in a step-by-step way, and I will link to the playlist that allows you to really see a ton of different videos that will help you with that part of the process. But what I'm going to do now is take this drawing, I'm going to scan it into my computer, and I'm going to print it out, you know, cut and copy, so that there will be 1, 2, 3, 4 different versions exactly the same, and then we're going to see how it changes when we add highlights in different ways. Okay, so we have the image replicated 4 different times, and what I'm going to do now is zoom in on this first one, and I'm going to begin using white gouache, my beloved white gouache, to add some highlights, and as I said, show you 4 different approaches to doing it. Alright, so we've zoomed in, and I'm going to use this one as my less is more version of the highlights, which is to say just a single highlight, circular in nature, putting on my nerdy scientist voice. And yeah, that's basically going to be it, folks. I'm going to add just 2 little dots. Of course, the trick is to try to get them in a similar location. Easier said than done. But that's basically it, and I do think that there is something to be said for this less is more approach. A single white highlight can create an interesting effect that is not matched by the other versions, but you are also going to see some pretty crazy addition of highlights in the other 3 versions. So let's go ahead and refocus and see what happens when we add at least 2 or 3 to create a different effect. Now this next one is what I'm going to call the big honkin' highlight approach, in which at least one of them is massive in size, and I would say the largest of any of the highlights that I'm going to do today. So let's just go ahead, we're going to push it all the way across, deep into the territory of the pupil. And my approach when I'm making a highlight this big is not to have it be perfectly circular, but maybe play around and make something that's a bit triangular-ish. And one thing you're going to see me doing right now is to have it actually break through the contour of the iris so as to connect with the whites of the eyes. Very common in Shojo Manga, and I think you'll agree that it has a different feeling when these 2 things connect with one another. It just looks even more shiny somehow. But as I said, I don't want to limit it to a single highlight. I'm going to go for a couple more. Now, one thing that I see a lot of artists doing when they are doing shoujo eyes and adding a bunch of different highlights is to do a narrow kind of sliver type of highlight down in the opposite corner. Corner? These things don't have corners. They're ovals. Ovals don't have corners, krill dog. But I think you know what I'm trying to say. It's just the opposite side of the circle. And even that one I think I'm also going to have break through. Let it be free and break through and join forces with the whites of the eye. And let's just add one more. Very often I'll see a second when there's a big highlight like this. I'll often see artists add a second, much smaller one that kind of echoes it a little bit maybe. And that is the approach I'm going to be using. Now, rather than do it all real time, I'm going to go ahead and repeat this as close as I can a second time, but this time do it all in time-lapse. Alright, so there you see the final result. It is a challenge to get two of these large highlights to be exactly the same size and shape. I'm not sure I've completely pulled it off. But you can see a much more glassy looking eye, almost sort of ghostly, spooky looking a little bit to me. But we are not done. Let's move on to the next one. I've got an interesting approach which will make it different from both of the ones that preceded it. Alright, now for this one I'm going to call it the Bullseye approach, which is to say I'm going to put one fairly substantial highlight right in the dead center of the pupil, or maybe not the absolute center, maybe a little bit higher, closer to the top than the bottom, but anyway, it's right there in the middle of the eye. This is not an approach that I use very frequently, but it does create an interesting effect. But before I declare this one finished, I thought just to make it a little more interesting, let's go ahead and do a couple more of these little sliver type highlights. One here, and how about a small one? This time I won't have it break through. You are staying inside the iris, little one. Whereas this one is going to sort of break through and connect with the whites of the eye. So yeah, give me a second in time-lapse. Bring in Old Man Time-Lapse. That's right, going to bring in Old Man Time-Lapse to help me replicate this in the second eye. Alright, now sometimes you find that the highlights need a little bit of extra help in terms of allowing them to be seen. This one I think is fairly visible, but this one not popping out so much. So I'm going back in with a little ink, and it is certainly fairly common to see some highlights actually get a little bit of an outline, just to help them pop a little bit more. So, yeah, making a sort of virtue of necessity, is that a phrase? It is now, because I just felt like people were not able to see these highlights. And indeed, you will see, if you study the printed Shojo Manga up close, that a lot of people will take this extra measure of outlining a highlight. So there you go, the Bullseye approach, really unusual I think, and has a kind of, to me, slightly robotic kind of a look to it, or certainly you feel like light is shining out at you from the pupil. Yeah, if you like it, feel free to go ahead and apply that to one of your own characters. But now it's time to move on to the last of the four, and it's going to be, for me, the most fun to do. Let's go ahead and get into it. So for this last one, I am calling it the HighlightPalooza version, in which I'm really going to go all out and do as many as 7 or 8 different highlights. And to me, that means you've got to limit the size of any one of them. Even this largest one I'm going to begin with is not going to be very large at all. But in a way, you almost, if you're going to do a character that has multiple highlights like this, you have to maybe work out a scheme. If indeed you want to repeat it exactly the same way, you have to come up with a pattern of where all those highlights are going to go. So to me, I'm thinking of this almost as like a constellation, a galaxy unto itself. And indeed, later on, well, why wait till later on? Let's go ahead and do it right now. I'm going to do one of these sort of imitating a star, which is something that I have seen in certain Shojo Manga illustrations. Of course, you've got to really commit to this and say every time, you know, that you draw this character's eyes up close, you're going to have to go in and do one of these little star things. But you know what? It's fun. So why not? Anyway, I wanted to make sure that this one stood out from the others and showed you something truly different with that little North Star shining out to us from the middle of the pupil. And let's go ahead and do more. Let's not stop. This is HighlightPalooza time here. So I'm gonna do like a double thing over here with the sliver approach, and do a second one. How many have we got now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's go for 8. Let's go for 8, man. I'm not gonna stop until I've got 8 different highlights within each of these irises. So I'll do a large one here, and I think I'll do a smaller one over here. And there you go, 8 highlights. I think this one needs a little beefing up. 8 highlights within a single eye. They said it couldn't be done, but I laughed at them. Sure it can be done, man. And again, it's going to be time for Mr. Old Man Time-Lapse to come in and help me finish this off. And I may go back in with the pen as I did before to add a little more definition to some of these or make them pop, as I said. But let's go ahead and finish up the second of the 2 irises. All right, well, there you have the HighlightPalooza version, and maybe we could also call it the Milky Way approach, in which there really does seem to be a sort of galaxy of little highlights in there. Very different approach, but attractive, I think, and one you might be willing to use if you have the patience to repeat that again and again every time you draw your character. But let's refocus so that we can see all 4 of them side by side and compare the different effects that these highlights create. All right, well, there you see all 4 of the different eyes. Really is fascinating to me the way changing the highlights can completely change the effect that you get from looking at any of these eyes. Let me know which one is your favorite, or indeed which one most resembles the style that you use. But for now, I want to go ahead and say thank you to anyone who supported me by getting any of my books, like Brody's Ghost. In this book, I was definitely doing the 1 highlight per eye approach. Less is more, man. I'm all about less is more. Mastering Manga, my book about how to draw manga. Chibi, the one that's dedicated entirely to drawing chibi characters. Ooh, there's a lot of highlights in there, aren't there? And my very latest book, The 2-Pencil Method. Wow, there's even highlights in those eyes. What do you know? I can't seem to get away from them, but for now, let me go ahead and lay down this pen. I want to say thanks to all of you for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be back with another one real soon.